Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, an almanac of garden history, literature, and small botanical joys. I'm Jennifer Ebeling, and today is July 30th. At the end of July, the mulleins are in full glory. I was driving with a friend last week, pointing out all those tall yellow blossoms in the ditches and fields. And in the setting sun, they are glorious. Gardeners have always been charmed by mullein. Vita Sackville West wrote about them on this day in 1950, and Walt Whitman wrote about them as well. He said, "Farmers think the mullein a mean, unworthy weed, but I've grown to a fondness for it." And so have I. I gardened for almost a decade before I ever noticed mullein. And then, once I did, I started seeing them everywhere, especially at the end of our street, where it turns weedy along Elm Creek. Around 6 years ago, a mullein actually planted itself in my front garden bed. Of course, it was in the wrong spot, but I didn't have the heart to move it. It just didn't seem very welcoming, and I didn't know if it would survive transplanting. So I just let it go, and it thrilled me all summer. Imagine my delight when it returned the following year, although it wasn't as vigorous, and after that, it never came back again. To this day, I still keep hoping it will return. I even put a little sign on my garden gate that says, "Mulleins, welcome here." Here's today's garden history. It was on this day in 1818 that Emily Brontë was born in Yorkshire. She wrote one novel, Wuthering Heights, under the name Ellis Bell, and then died a year later at the age of 30. Emily was not a gardener, but she was a walker, and the moors behind the parsonage were her whole landscape. After she died, her sister Charlotte wrote a preface trying to capture what those moors meant to her. She said, "My sister Emily loved the moors. Flowers brighter than the rose bloomed in the blackest of the heath for her. Out of a sullen hollow in a livid hillside, her mind could make an Eden." And it was on this day in 1857 that the landscape architect James Leal Greenleaf was born in Courtwright, New York. His family were French Huguenots who fled France and translated their last name into Greenleaf. James trained as a civil engineer, and he figured out how to transplant full-grown trees into new estates so that a Gilded Age lawn could look as though it had always been there. But his greatest commission was the Lincoln Memorial. Henry Bacon's temple was formal, rigid, and made of marble. But Greenleaf let the temple be the formality, rising out of the chaos. He planted magnolias and hollies in loose groups to make a grove. 5 years later, James quit his work altogether and spent his last years painting landscapes instead of building them. And in 1865, on this day, the historian Alicia Amherst was born in Poole, Dorset. She grew up with one foot in her father's library, filled floor to ceiling with medieval manuscripts, and placed the other firmly in her mother's garden. At 29, she published the first scholarly history of English gardens ever written. She married and then spent the rest of her life writing under a name that kept changing. First as Alicia Amherst, then as the newlywed, Mrs. Evelyn Cecil, then as Lady Rockley when her husband got his title, and finally as the Dowager Baroness Rockley after her husband died. Same woman, 4 names, and the librarians have been sorting it out ever since. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Garden Stories, edited by Diana Secker-Tesdell. Anthologies Week takes a turn today. This isn't garden writing, it's fiction. Short stories from around the world across more than a century set in or around the garden, written by Virginia Woolf, Catherine Mansfield, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Frances Hodgson Burnett, and Daphne du Maurier, just to name a few. Jamaica Kincaid opens the book, and while she admits she's a gardener herself, she recognizes the challenges when she says gardening is an act of utter futility. Virginia Woolf's contribution takes place in Kew Gardens, told from the perspective of a snail making its way across a flower patch and worried about the alarming crackle of a dead leaf. Then there's a section called Humor in the Garden with a Saki story about renting plants to impress the neighbors. There are ravenous orchids, a crystal garden dissolving in time, and a young woman who plants every day whatever she's given: roses and violets, buttons and broken cups, and love and fear and sorrow. Gardens have been settings for stories since Adam and Eve because they're calming, grounding, and home. Garden Stories, edited by Diana Secker-Tesdell, is an abundant crop of entrancing stories, perfect for a garden afternoon. And finally, here's something sweet to ignite the little botanic spark in your heart. It was on this day in 1738 that the English royal gardener Charles Bridgman died in Kensington before his 50th birthday. Charles helped English gardeners transition from the stiff geometry of French gardens to the rolling green landscapes we think of as English. His father was a working gardener on a great estate in Cambridgeshire, so Charles grew up learning how gravel walks were laid and how great gardens looked from the working side of the wall. In 1714, he was hired to design the gardens at Stowe. He ended up working there for the rest of his life. Around 1719, he came up with an idea that changed English gardens forever. He dug a ditch. For centuries, great gardens were protected by walls, stopping deer and sheep and cattle from grazing their way through a bed. And while the walls worked, they also destroyed the view. So instead of building up, Charles dug down, creating a ditch 4 to 8 feet deep around the garden, with a steep drop on the garden side and a gentle slope on the field side. This way, the livestock couldn't climb in. But from the garden at eye level, the ditch was invisible, which meant gardeners had to be careful, and it's one of the reasons why it was called a ha-ha, because anyone walking toward the edge of the lawn might fall in the hidden ditch and cry out in surprise. In 1724, a man named John Percival saw the ha-ha at Stowe, and he wrote to his cousin. He said, "What adds to the beauty of this garden is that it is not bounded by walls, but by a ha-ha, which leaves you the sight of the beautiful woody country." Percival marveled at the ha-ha because since there was no wall, he couldn't tell where the garden paths ended and the countryside began, making the garden look like it went on forever. Which is exactly the ha-ha's whole trick. Charles Bridgman died at midlife, with many of his commissions unfinished. He was succeeded by the great William Kent, who built on Bridgman's layouts and completely eliminated straight paths. that was Charles Bridgman, the English royal gardener, who died on this day, July 30th, in 1738. Stowe is looked after by the National Trust, and you can still walk right up to the ha-ha that Charles dug 300 years ago. Today's book was Garden Stories, edited by Diana Secker-Tesdell. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.